Hey friends, thanks for taking time to listen in on a conversation Dick and I had about the US, Mexico City, and Brazilian Grand Prix. Has Lando's World Drivers' Championship Challenge come too little too late? Have we seen the end of Sergio's F1 career? Could Ferrari sneak in and steal the Constructors' Championship? These were all questions we addressed in our review of this month's triple header in the Americas. Programming note, we recorded this conversation before the Kick Sauber driver announcement. Before we get to our conversation, I need to ask, can you help us out? If you haven't already, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app, as well as share this episode with other F1 fans. We know our growth is because of you, and the guys and I thank you. Hope you enjoy our conversation. Dick, we have a monthly race review, and
I'm looking forward to this. Yes.
I think so too, because it's a triple header and it brought the Formula One circus to our neck of the woods during this last month. So we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, we do. I mean, part of it is just getting used to not having to wake up at, early in the morning and go catch a race or something. We actually were able to watch it in the afternoon like a regular sporting event in the United States. It was pretty remarkable. I could get used to that.
Yes. And especially both of us had very active months as well.
Oh, yeah.
So being able to incorporate our love for Formula One in a realistic timetable was kind of a nice thing to be able to do. A great
Oh,
way to
yes.
start our fall. Okay, so our backyard event that kicked off this triple header, COTA. What was your highlight, or do you want me to tell you mine?
I'll let you go first.
I don't think you're going to have to work very hard to figure out what mine was.
Yeah,
I
but I
wrote
know,
it.
but that's why I'm letting you go first.
I appreciate it. I mean, duh, Charles's win. It was beautiful. I mean, like chef's kiss of how wonderful it was. My only thing was that the drama, because of others, overshadowed it. But at the same time, it was totally wonderful to see on that stage, that podium, I guess, and know that it was our people that had put it together. That just made me super excited. And to see his joy in winning, of course, is always something I enjoy.
Oh,
But
yeah.
on a more serious note, I put it in our race notes that I wanted to discuss something, which was specifically, I want to make sure we talk about the stewards called this weekend, which I wrote that in COTA, but I feel like I could say that for every weekend since then. I don't necessarily disagree with their calls that they did at COTA. I just want to understand them better. I really do think that permanent stewards need to be considered by Formula One. I think this would allow for a consistency of the rule application. That maybe that's the lawyer in me, but you're the racing veteran, you're the racer, you've done so much within the sport. So you tell me, am I totally off base in thinking that that should be the way the sport considers?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely 100% right. I couldn't agree with you more. I think they need a full-time stewarding team. Let's face it. I mean, the sport is big enough and it's professional and all that kind of stuff. You've got to have some consistency in, let's call them the referees for that matter, right? I mean, the NBA has their own referees that they pay to go ref basketball games and they're paid well. Why wouldn't you do this in Formula One, given that in some respects you do have life and death circumstances, literally, and there's the whole thing around just the consistency of how the rules are being interpreted, or they're slow to make a decision. And it's sort of like, when they're slow to make a decision, that affects strategy. If they go an extra couple laps and then they say, oh, hey, by the way, you got a 10-second penalty or something like that, that does affect everybody's strategy, not just the guy that's been impacted. And so, yeah, I just feel like that they need to do it. It's too professional of a sport to not have a traveling circus that goes with them that's just the stewards. And the other part is that I really have to say that, the stewards should never be in the spotlight, of any sport, right? You don't want to hear about a basketball game being determined by the stewards, or by the referees, right? That's the last thing you want. Have some controversial call or no call, right? And so I think, we saw it in Abu Dhabi in 2021 where there was certainly some questions being called there, and of course, that led to the firing of the race director. But it's more than just the race director. So yeah, I 100% agree. They need to do something like that. They're too professional otherwise.
Yeah, yeah. Like I was actually very surprised when I first became a fan of Formula One to realize that the stewards weren't permanent. It was really
Yeah,
shocking to me.
yeah,
And the only thing I can think of is because of the history of the sport, where it was more exclusive, it was more closed off, and it didn't nearly have as many races, that maybe you could just have like the gentlemen former
yeah.
race drivers going in and doing it. And it's the same growing pains I think of sometimes of small businesses that eventually start to become large corporations and they
Right.
have to start expanding. You can't, it may have been sufficient when you first did it, and everyone operated with this good mentality and good feelings to one another. But as you start to bring in new people, the culture is going to change and there needs to be some level of consistency. So
Yep.
I really hope that we can address this so that way that's just one less thing. I agree with you about the stewards not being a spotlight. Like I don't like that. I just think it doesn't give a good taste to anybody that you're trying to bring
No.
into the sport as well. So
Yeah, I
then
mean, if you think
next, oh,
about
go
it,
ahead.
IndyCar, yeah, I mean, IndyCar, we don't
Hmm.
talk a whole lot about IndyCar, but we talk a little bit about it.
Hmm.
Everybody is the same person in race control every single race. I mean, I don't understand why we're not doing that in Formula One.
And it's not even maybe every year you have to do it. Maybe you commit to a year of 24 races, which is pretty intense.
Yep.
And then you rotate out, yeah, I think
Yeah.
that would be good. Okay. So
Yep.
then moving on to Mexico City.
I always think Mexico City is a little bit of an aberration
Hmm.
because of the altitude of the city and therefore the racetrack. It's got some pretty long straightaways. It's got a very cool stadium area where the cars are, literally driving through a stadium. And so it poses some very interesting challenges in terms of you have to have enough straight line speed, but not at the sacrifice of downforce for the corners and, all those kinds of good engineering geeky things. And I don't think either one of us were surprised that Ferrari was strong. I was super happy about Carlos winning. He's off to Williams, which is definitely a resurgent team, but they're not Ferrari, not yet anyway. And I really hope, now with three races left, that Carlos is on the podium at least once or twice more. I would love to see him get a win, although I really think Lando Norris is like, I'm going to try to win all three of them. That's what I hope he comes in with. But on the other hand, I would love to see Carlos pick up a win. So that's my thoughts.
I think you're right. I also like how you highlighted about the track and the setup and configuration of that track has to be considered, especially in light of our conversation with Malcolm Finch
Yep.
and how he unpacked a lot of the strategic decision making that they have to do in the world of IndyCar that you so wisely wanted us to have that conversation in the show so people could understand the implications and considerations that those in Formula One are having to do as well. And so I think having that ahead of Mexico City and our previous conversations about setup helped me to have even greater appreciation for what we were watching. And as you said, watching Carlos, even though again, on track drama overshadowed it a bit, it
Yep.
was really impressive to see how he pulled it out. I said this in our race notes that I really think that he's an underrated driver and that
Yes.
this whole transition out cannot be seen as a reflection on his driving ability. It really is just Ferrari made a choice to go with Lewis
Yep.
Hamilton. And if that's the person that displaces you from your seat, I don't know like how hard you should feel bad about yourself. And I
Right.
love that he is pushing to really take out every element of this experience so that way he could walk out with his head held high. I really love that for him. So I
Yep.
thought Mexico was a great moment for him and really for Ferrari itself.
Absolutely. And the other thing is you make the point about Carlos being underrated. And it was funny while you were talking, I thought, maybe Carlos is the Rodney Dangerfield of Formula One. I get no respect.
Oh, I hope not. I hope not. I really hope that he just continues to age like fine wine.
Yep.
That's that. I mean, watching his trajectory, I feel like I listened to somebody highlighting this in another podcast, maybe one of the official F1 podcasts, that noted that every team that he has been with, it's after he moves on that you really see how much he has enabled the team to move forward, that he has a technical prowess and
Right.
appreciation. He has a high strategic appreciation of what he's doing, and that the teams are better for having had Carlos, which makes me also think Williams is really smart for bringing him in and not letting him sit on the sidelines and realizing that they need to be aggressive in making a
Mm,
package for him. So I hope it's
hmm
just as much as we're hoping to see Aston Martin really come into
hmm
their own next year. I'm really hoping Williams will be able to do that with Carlos in their stable now.
Absolutely.
Okay, so then moving on to Brazil.
A lot's been said about Max's brilliance in this particular win and his brilliance in racing in the rain in general. And I don't think there's any doubt that this is going to be one that is remembered long after Max has, hung up his helmet as being one of the amazing demonstrations of driving prowess. It may not be Senna's opening lap at Donington, and I think it was 93 maybe,
Mhm.
when he was like driving around the outside of cars in the first lap. I mean, it was something else, or a race that is really obscured in the mist of time, which was Jackie Stewart's win at the Nürburgring in 1968, and appalling conditions. It was horrible. Everybody was terrified of running at the Nürburgring anyway, and then you throw in the rain on top of it. And Stewart had all of those very same fears and concerns and worries and all those kinds of things. And yet they dropped the green flag and he just went off into the distance and destroyed them. So that was pretty amazing. And so, but they're going to all be up there with what Max did, so good stuff.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, and for it to happen at Interlagos, no less, that's kind of amazing to me. Those hills. I remember as we were looking at free practice, and how before we start practice or a race, they show you the circuit and the
Right.
turns. And I guess I had forgotten over the last year the elevation changes. So when we were watching that during free practice, I went, oh, this is going to be fun. Because in my brain, I often think of Zandvoort and its
Mm.
elevation changes. But
Hmm.
this one was one that I went, yeah, this is going to be fun. And I hadn't paid attention to the weather report. And obviously we know that it can rain. So then as the weekend unfolded, I thought, wow, this is going to be interesting. But I never expected it to be what we saw on Sunday. And for Max to pull it from 17 and wrestle that car and really rely on his team and his skill. I mean, all of that coming together, plus the no visibility, right? It was truly, I know everyone keeps using the word masterclass, but it really was. It was
It
beautiful
really
to
was.
watch. And his
Yep.
also his determination, like when you listen to his onboard, the professionalism, that strength that you could hear in him
Hmm.
was something I feel like we haven't heard in the last few races as much, but it was just that single-minded focus that we've come to expect of him. I felt resurged in that moment that like called within him all the strength to do this.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree. I think, you know, I'm sure that Lando left Brazil in a fairly low state of mind. It wasn't that he had a bad race. It's just he dealt with some horrific conditions to score valuable points that may still be, what he needed, right? I mean, all that would have to happen is for Lando to win, let's say in Vegas, and Max crash, which is, both of those are possible, and all of a sudden the championship's wide open again. And so you just never know. I mean, the outrageous swings of fortune are right there, but Lando's got to keep his head up, and I think he will. But yeah, that's tough stuff. The other thing is that there was so much crash damage. I heard that Williams had $1 million in crash damage, which for a little team like that, I mean, that's ooh. That's pretty catastrophic. The last thing that I will say, and just I know we've talked about this in previous podcasts, but years ago, I was on a consulting engagement in Sao Paulo, and one weekend I was down there because I couldn't fly home. And long story. And so I rented a car and I drove to Interlagos and kind of snuck into the track, believe it or not. I was eventually chased away, but when you see the elevation changes in person, it's way more dramatic in person than it is on TV. I can tell you that. The Senna S's, turn one
Mm-hmm.
and two, that is an incredibly steep drop off.
I'm going to have to go and rewatch that section again, at least in those first few laps when the water was so heavy,
Oh
and
yeah.
really kind of imagine it again
Yep.
being even more than what I can see on a
Yep.
TV screen. That's
Yep.
good. Yeah, I forgot about your story. So thank you for
Yep.
reminding us of that. Okay, so then moving on from our highlights of these races, let's kind of move to the development portion of our conversation. So, what development lessons do you think can be learned for the fans who are watching?
I think it's really, really interesting. All the teams are at the stage now where the 2025 cars are coming right along, right? We're in November, and those new cars are going to be on track, what, early March, something like that, and being revealed in mid-February, or although we've seen some of these reveals now, all it is a livery reveal. It's not a reveal of the car. But anyway, at any rate, they're busy. And yet, teams like McLaren, man, they're still doing everything they can to win the Constructors' Championship. And, you know, somebody made note of the fact that this is the seventh rear wing that they've brought to a race this year. So, in other words, every three races they're bringing a new wing. That's crazy, and that just goes to show you how hard they're working just to make sure that they've got the very best shot at winning. And I mean, okay, will they have an eighth wing at some stage here in the next three races? I don't know, probably not, but maybe. So that's pretty incredible to think about. The other part is that, like Aston Martin came up with some upgrades at COTA, tried to make them work at COTA, that didn't work, tried to make them work at Brazil, didn't work. And so they reverted to an earlier specification for the car for the race in Brazil. And guess what? It didn't work either. So I'm sure they're like, man, oh man, I wouldn't even want to be around Lawrence Stroll right now.
I would say for me that I think it's the one that at this point in the year, maybe last year we didn't see it as profoundly, is their clear packs. It was everybody chasing Red Bull last year and
Hmm.
then the back of the field. But here
Hmm.
I think we have a true front of field, two in the midfield, and then everybody else in the back. And that's exciting to me to see them all doing their own internal squabbles and war efforts and like strategic calls. I'm really grateful that Formula One has realized that they need to show some of the back of the race battles and overtakes more than they may have in the past. So
Yep.
we can appreciate when a Haas or a Red Bull, oh not Red Bull, Racing Bull or B Carb, sorry, all their names, my brain sometimes loses it.
Yeah.
But like when they're doing
Toro
these
Rosso.
efforts, yeah, Toro Rosso, all of that, right?
Yeah.
On that note, I read an article that said that they're going to go from V carb now to RB, and they're
Yep.
actually going to acknowledge that it's Racing Bull now. So,
Right.
and then at the end, the person said, "Why can't we just have Toro Rosso again?" I thought, I know that was so nice, so classic and cool. But I
Yep.
digress. I went on a tangent. All that to say is, I really am enjoying this, and I'm looking forward to seeing, as you well noted, any of these incremental changes that these teams are going to do. Will they? I love how you pointed out the wing changes that McLaren's doing. I think that's what, on the technological side and the strategic side, that is really something we should be paying attention to as fans and realizing that that's happening, and that could be that incremental thing that could tip them over. And the next would be, have our predictions come true? Are we seeing things that we thought we were going to see, or are we seeing things we didn't expect to see? So I guess I would say that Red Bull may be fighting for the constructors, which we assumed would happen. But what we are no longer seeing is McLaren and Ferrari on their heels. They've actually surpassed them.
Yep.
That said, it's still a race. Just like as we're watching a Grand Prix, you can't think that the race is done in lap 30 of 60 if you're in P1 at that point because you're not done. I don't know that anything that will happen between now and the end of the season that could turn everything on its head. And I think you've noted some of the options already. So I would tell any fan that our predictions are in some ways coming true, is that you had very astutely, from your experience as a longtime fan, noted that Red Bull's going to have a harder time keeping that gap and that margin while the other teams start to close it in. I think the
Yep.
question we had was, will they be able to overcome Red Bull? And it seems like they're on that path because they have technically done it, but Red Bull has proven that they could still somehow tip the scales back into their hands. So it'll be fun to see that. On that note, that's on the positive. On the other side, I think I'm gutted for Mercedes and Aston Martin, and we kind of alluded to it earlier. It's that
Hmm.
each weekend this month, it's been a pain to see how the weekend goes for them. I'm
Oh
talking
yeah.
about each team. Like, I
Yeah.
keep being hopeful, like during the practice session, okay, it's going to work out. And then something happens. And then each are significantly distant from their competitors, Mercedes from the rest of the front of the pack. And then there's such a gap between them and Aston. And then Aston's got such a gap between it in the back of the field. It's got to be very hard and frustrating for each of those teams, in my opinion, to keep coming, keep doing, keep believing that they're going to be able to come out of this and next season will be better. I imagine for them, the end of the season cannot come soon enough. And I wonder how much this is also because of so many of the conversations you and I have had, that they maybe have already turned the page to 25 and
Right.
realize, yeah, it's just not worth stressing ourselves out. We're going to still bring it, but let's put as much energy as possible that is within the allowed limits to focus on 25.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. And I think, for a team like Mercedes or Aston Martin, I mean, Mercedes did make some steps forward with some of their upgrades. I don't know that Aston Martin ever made a step forward, quite frankly. And,
Really?
yeah, I really don't, because I think that, the other, the V carbs, the Haas's of the world, Williams, they're all catching them up. I mean, it's almost like I found myself saying to, my son Derek, watching one of the races, it's sort of like, gosh, I wonder what Alonso could do in a Williams or a Haas. I mean, there's a team that I can't
Mm-hmm.
believe how well they're going, but they are.
Well, so then let's look at the teams themselves and really think through, like the more of the midfield, I guess, was
Sure.
what we used to call them, but actually now they've really turned into the front of field,
Yeah.
which be McLaren. I have to say, I've got a bit of a pet peeve annoyance happening right now as I watch everybody commentating. Can I get on a little
Hmm.
bit of a soapbox? Is that
Go
all
for
right?
it. Go for
Okay,
it.
I really am frustrated by how the media is nitpicking every decision and second guessing them. I feel like they are just trying to get on with it and they know they're not perfectly executing everything they need to do, but they are learning and growing. And yes, this team has a history of winning, but that's not the group of people that are currently the team. And so together they're crafting their collective winning strategy in this era. I found myself trying to mute the commentators and just be like, stop, like just let's just see how this goes. Am I being overly sensitive? I'm not like the only person I identify as a fangirl of is truly Charles, but again, I'm an equal supporter of all teams and all drivers, but I just feel like they're just getting bagged. Is that part of the process that happens at this point in a reg cycle, or when somebody is starting to really prove that they're on top of it?
Yeah, I think a little bit of it is probably sour grapes on the part of some people, because McLaren struggled for so many years, right? And now they're starting to see some decent success, and all that hard work and the tears and all that kind of stuff pay off. And so now they've got to find something to pick on them about. They're not executing perfectly, but they're doing it right enough that they may very well be winning the Constructors' Championship this year. And if they win the Constructors' Championship, everybody just needs to shut the hell up. I mean, that's really what it is.
Okay, so I'm not being overly sensitive to this because, like, people are talking about like British media versus global media, and I'm thinking,
Right.
I'm not either of those, and I'm a little bit annoyed. Like, there's other stuff we could talk about right now instead of just seeming to have this desire to just pick on McLaren. I'm off my soapbox now. Let's move on to Ferrari. So, Ferrari, last month I said they continue to fight. I don't think any of us considered Ferrari could pull themselves up to the position position they are now, can they actually be a challenger for the constructors? That's what I said last month. Now I'm like, I'm really trying not to get my hopes up. This triple header included tracks that are predisposed, I think, to the Ferrari car. I think you said it that in your race notes that Las Vegas should also suit Ferrari as well. My hope is, could the two drivers pull out a 1-2 finish somehow? Would they be able to haul enough points to be able to, and push themselves really hard to be able to somehow get onto the podium there and eventually win that constructors, like almost like a sleeper? Do you think that that is being too hopeful now that we've seen these 3 races and you know what tracks we get to see next?
Right. Yeah, I think Vegas should be good for Ferrari for sure. Hard to say about the other 2 races. You would think that they're going to be right there or thereabouts. There or thereabouts is usually pretty darn good. The problem is Lando and Oscar are awfully strong. Max is awfully strong. If you take those 3, it really makes it even more difficult for Carlos and Charles, who I don't believe has the best car, but they've got one of the best cars. If you see where I'm going with all this, I think McLaren has the best car. So really, Lando and Oscar should be the ones running up front. Red Bull's not going to get much help from Sergio. I hate to say it that way, but they're just not. It may well come down. It may well come down to what possible errors might strike McLaren and Max, and which of the 3 cars, McLaren, Red Bull, and Ferrari, has the best tire deg. And it may come down to that, because I could see a race like Qatar becoming a tire deg race, especially with what we saw last year, where they said, hey, you got to pit every 15 laps or something like that, and so the drivers were out running qualifying laps for the whole race. That could be a wild card. Now, I don't know what they're going to do this year, what's Pirelli bringing for tires and all that kind of stuff, but if they go back to that, now Qatar becomes the real wild card. You'd think of Vegas and gambling and all that, oh, that's your wild card, but nah, Vegas has that long monster straight, so you'd think Ferrari would be pretty strong. I don't know, man. I mean, they could sneak in and take it, but I think they're a bit of a long shot.
Outside of the car, I think one of the benefits for Ferrari these last races has been they're not having to come into the pit, and the strategic decision making has been better than what we've seen in the past. But what you just said brings that into a higher priority, that they have to ensure it's executed flawlessly. And last year, wasn't it Qatar where we had everyone complaining about the heat and dehydration and all that? So you could see that's going to throw that variable in that could cause, because even in Brazil, when they called in Charles for that pit, I was like, what are you all doing? And Charles even admitted, I think yesterday when he did an interview, that was a wrong call and that it should have been done differently. He said the setup was something he and Carlos worked together on, and he regrets the setup because it made the car very difficult to manage in Brazil. That information plus what you just said makes me go, okay, yeah, it's going to have to be perfect for them to get it in Qatar, even after, if they actually were able to do something successfully in Las Vegas. So,
right.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm not going to get my hopes up. I'm just going to be cautiously optimistic, I guess, on that.
I think it's going to be so much fun.
Yes, it's going to be great.
Yeah.
I mean, Max's resurgence at the race was really inspiring. And I agree with you. It is sad that Sergio isn't, which we can talk about that when we get to the drivers. Red Bull has to be trying to figure out how are they going to pull this out. Okay.
Agreed.
Well, another team, Mercedes. Each weekend, I said this, like my heart is hurt for them. I mean, it was blow after blow. And it's not like they're not trying. I do think many of these crashes and problems are out of their control. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Like, am I being too kind to them right now? I don't think so, but you may have different perspective.
They just had a tough stretch. I mean, that's all there is to it. And I mean, you think about both George and Lewis crashed in the same corner at COTA at different times, but pretty much both of them reported the same thing. It was like the car was on such a knife's edge and then then all of a sudden all the grip was gone and goodbye, and went straight into the barriers and boom. And that was with upgrades that they were really hoping were going to work. I mean, it's just these cars are so hard to figure out. I think that they just need to bring in Malcolm Finch and he'll sort them out.
That's right.
But plug for Malcolm.
That's right. Do you think also the track surface, especially at COTA, that both of them crashing at that same turn made
Yeah.
me wonder? Because I feel like even during the press conference, the drivers highlighted that the track surface was a problem. We also heard that in Brazil. In these resurfacing, do they have conversations with Pirelli to discuss like what's needed for those tires? Or because tracks are used for multiple motorsport disciplines and series, they can't be that specific. Do you see where I'm kind of going?
Oh, absolutely. No, hard to say because the beating that a track surface takes from a Formula One car with all the downforce that it makes, it's got to be brutal. And so I'm sure that because it's so expensive to resurface a track, they've really got to get that mixture right of what they lay down and for durability, because the track owner is thinking, I can't do this every year. It's one of those kind of deals. And so while I'm sure that Pirelli is consulted, it's probably more like, okay, here's the track. We're done. Why don't you boys come take a look at it and see what compound you think is going to work best?
I see.
I think that's probably what happens.
That does make sense because it is infrastructure investment that the track is making versus thinking about the racing series and their specific needs. So we talked about our sadness of what's going on at Mercedes. Do you want to switch over to the other section of the track or the paddock, I should say, that is also giving us sadness?
Oh yeah, Aston Martin. I mean, we've kind of really touched on it, but really they've just lost the point for developing this car for whatever reason. They have good people. They make their parts, with based on what all their various testing models say, whether it's in the wind tunnel or their CFD. And they say, oh, this is going to cure our problems and we're suddenly going to be fast and all that. And yet they don't work. And it's just super hard to watch. And Interlagos was just a horrible race for them. They had some sort of a software glitch that put on purpose, the goal was to put more rear brake bias into the car under the brakes in the rain to keep the rear tires heated up so they would have more grip in the corners. Interesting concept, but that's what happened that sent Lance off on the warm-up lap, for crying out loud. He went to the brakes, the back end locked up, and he went straight off the track. And Alonso was dealing with the same thing. That's what caused him to, be out of the fight. And then on top of it, Alonso was complaining about his back getting beat to death because of the porpoising. And I'm like, okay, since when does a car porpoise in the rain? They're not generating, you would think, that kind of downforce because they're not going that fast. And yet, here's the Aston Martin porpoising. What's up with that? So anyway, I don't know. It's just sad.
Well, I did not realize what you just said about the brake bias, and that was what sent Lance off.
Yep.
Oh, that makes so much more sense. I was really confused. And again, I felt like the commentators were focusing on so much stuff that I was like, I don't really think we need to be thinking about that right now. This would have been a great piece of information, either post race to have heard, or even just that data point to listen, like for them to have listened in on the race comms to be able to gather maybe this is what's going on. So thank you for that. That's really good intel. Okay, so then let's move on to Alpine. I was kind of surprised at the flashes of good moments in COTA as well as Mexico City for Alpine, but really I would think that after the turbulent year they've had, Brazil has got to be that silver lining on the darkest cloud that they've had over this year. I really felt glad for them as a team. I think that they've done a decent job overall considering all the off-track drama that they've had to deal with. I mean, I talked about it in my race notes about some of the comments from the drivers, which we can talk about when we get to the drivers section of our conversation. But what are your thoughts when you look at what Alpine did?
Well, no question about it. I think Alpine is maybe one of the surprise teams here in these last three races. And I'm really happy for this team and their drivers too, who, by the way, from the little bit that I'm reading, it sounds like those two, Pierre and Esteban, have kind of like reconciled a little bit. Maybe I don't know that they're ever going to be, big buddies, but maybe they're on each other's Christmas card list now or something. But,
Mm-hmm.
and I read that if Alpine can just kind of keep it out of the fence and, do, some decent races these last three events, that second and third place finish gave them such a load of points. It may be worth about $30 million in the construction
Mm,
championship. That's just nuts. So
yeah.
yeah, good for them.
So let's look at Kick Sauber. It's what I've said pretty much all season is I don't really have anything to say
Yep.
positive or negative. My heart just goes out to the team. Like,
It's just got to be so
yeah,
hard for all those guys. I mean, they just,
yeah.
it's just like, good grief, how could this have been? It's always been a small team, but they haven't been that bad. I mean, poor old Botas and we know he's capable of winning races.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do
Mm-hmm.
you stay motivated? I mean, it's just like, shoot, yeah,
Well, and
feel
you
sorry for him.
understand that, and because of not only as a racer, but also your work as a team
Yeah.
leader, like
Oh yeah.
like the toll that can take on your team when they're just feeling the drudges of it. V Carb kind of shocked me a little bit. They moved up and did some pretty good points accumulation during these last few weeks. I think that they're benefiting from having two drivers who are dueling really for primacy inside the team. So that's bringing out, like, I guess it's the principle that you guys have shared over and over of your teammate is your first rival. The two
Yep.
of them definitely are showing that
Hmm.
they are rivals. And in some cases, I would say Liam is even showing that he feels his rival is really Sergio. And we can talk about that driver drama later as well. But I think the beneficiary of that is VCarb, the team. They're getting those points and hopefully we're going to move up higher into the standings. But it also does depend on how some of their other competitors, the back of the field, how they handle some of this, uncertainty over these next 3 weeks. What are your
Yep.
thoughts?
Yeah, no, I feel the same way. I mean, Lawson is certainly showing the wisdom of moving Ricardo aside, even though that it pains me to say it, but on the other hand, it's just the reality of it, right? I mean, he's doing a lot more with the same car than what Ricardo was able to manage. So, yeah, I mean, that's racing, unfortunately. And of course, Sergio, I think, is in the same boat. To your point, I think the rivalry between Tsunoda and Lawson is one of those deals that's starting to bubble over. It could get ugly very quickly if they don't manage those two drivers well, because both of them are very ambitious. Both of them want that seat that Sergio's sitting in if Sergio goes away.
Okay, so let's move on to Haas. I gotta say, I am really rooting for them. I was kind of neutral about them in past years, but
Hmm.
this year, when I look at their overall performance, and especially this last month, I mean, major kudos to the team, to Kevin, to Nico, Ollie. They really are pushing themselves and seeking to do that fundamental culture change. So I'm really
Yep.
excited, despite, it was rough in Brazil, but I really am optimistic that they're going to be able to rest and recover and reset.
Yeah, no, I agree. And one thing that we need to remember is, yeah, okay, Brazil was tough for Haas, but you know what? Other than for Max and the two Alpine cars, it was tough for everybody else. Of the 20 entries, 17 of them had a rough time in Brazil
Good
to
point.
to one degree or another. And yes, Haas has very much so turned the corner, I think. I think it's really impressive what they've managed to do.
And then that brings us to Williams. Okay,
Mm.
this triple header hasn't been as successful as I think the team had hoped. I don't think it's a lack of effort. I mean, we all were very hopeful with the results at Monza and Baku and that Williams was on an upswing, but COTA, Mexico, and Brazil brought a lot of hardship back onto the team's plate. Like I was looking at their points acquisition and I was like, oh, it wasn't as good as I was in the weekend. When
Hmm.
it happens, you don't necessarily think about how that looks in the long term. So by doing the monthly review, when I really think about it, I'm like, oh, it wasn't as good as I was hoping it was going to be. And then you
Hmm.
add in, as you so wisely noted, the crash bill. It's really got to be affect their mindset and their ambitions for being able to upgrade their infrastructure and their processes. So I'm hoping that over the break in these next 2 weeks, they really can regroup and figure out how do they really haul it in the next 3 races. So somehow they're not going to be derailed for 2025. That's what I'm
Hmm.
hoping. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's to me, it's very interesting because, Williams has definitely taken a step forward, right? No question about it. But I think it's really interesting. Let's not forget that we talk about crash damage. Let's not forget that when they started the season, they did not have a spare car or enough spares to build up a spare car. Let's put it
That's
that
right.
way. And Albon crashed hard enough in Australia that Sargent was forced to sit out for the race. And here we are in Brazil. Albon crashes again. This time they leave Colapinto in the car. Huh. And there you go. But that's two
Ooh,
races.
I hadn't
That's
thought about that.
right. That's
What does
two
that
races.
say? What does that
Well,
say about the team and their decision making and how they're viewing their two drivers?
yeah, right. I thought that was very interesting. I was like, huh. So maybe they think Colapinto is quicker than Albon already. However, having said that, Colapinto also showed that he is human, and he had a very difficult race in Brazil. Let's face it. And so at this stage of the career, I mean, he's got enough goodwill. It's like Ollie Behrman. I mean, neither one of those guys had very good races in Brazil, but you know what? They've got enough goodwill for them
Hmm.
because of previous performances earlier in the season that people are going to look past it. But both of those guys are going to have to learn the lessons that they learned and then execute based on those lessons that were learned. I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens. And we'll talk about this in a little bit more as we talk about drivers. But, the fact that there's rumors circulating around that Colapinto could be either Red Bull bound or V carb bound shows how he's regarded in the paddock. The other thing I'm going to throw at, just because I'm a little bit of a comic, is it just me, or does Franco have more than a passing resemblance to Ayrton Senna?
I actually think you're right. Like the
Yeah.
profile and the way
Mm-hmm.
he kind of carries his stature
Yep.
definitely does have you kind of do a double take if you saw their pictures side by side.
Yeah, he kind of looks like him, and it's sort
Hmm.
of like if he can sort of approach that level of performance, I mean, I think that young man he may have a future.
That's right. That's right. Well, maybe he'll be the one to bridge the Brazilian Argentinian divide
There
of
you go.
like, and they'll start to adopt him like they did Lewis, that would be kind
Yeah,
of
yeah.
cool. So we've kind of discussed it in certain points over the conversation so far, but let's get into the section where we want to talk about the drivers.
Sure.
So Max, Checo, Yuki, and what we used to say was Daniel, but now Liam. And I find it fascinating what you just said about the goodwill that Ollie and Franco
Hmm.
have generated. It made me think that is that part of it, does that principle also apply to Liam from last year coming in at Zandvoort and performing at the level that he did? Wasn't it Zandvoort? Or was
Yeah,
it the
yeah.
week after
No, it was
Zandvoort?
Zandvoort. It was
Yeah.
Zandvoort. He
And
came
he
right
came
in.
into
Yeah.
a race, right? It was
Hmm.
raining and I talk about a very challenging track and really knocked it out of the park. As I was just kind of thinking through, about the race itself, what I felt was Max had a fire in him, rightly or wrongly. Everyone's been attacking him. But I
Yep.
think that that's been pushing him, whether he's doing his racecraft wisely, fairly. I really would love to hear your perspective. Like, is he driving cleanly in your opinion? Because that's been a point of discussion and
Mm-hmm.
that people have brought up. I feel like you might have touched on it in your COTA race notes.
Yeah, I mean, I've been wondering. I'm not saying I'm right. Okay, I want
Hmm.
to preface
It's your
this.
opinion.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm not even sure I have an opinion formed on it, but what I would say is that it almost seems like, okay, Max is probably the fastest guy out there. If he's not the fastest guy, he's one of the fastest guys. And he's certainly, as we've seen, an unbelievable wet weather driver, which says a lot about his feel for the car and all that kind of stuff. But when he's given direct wheel to wheel competition, I wonder if he has gotten so used to just destroying the opposition that when somebody goes and mounts a serious attack on him, he's not really sure how to respond. And I think this has led to him maybe doing some things that were a little bit, it's certainly in the gray area, if not an outside, just a flat out, no, that's not cool, one of those kind of deals. I'm just not sure. I have not made up my mind yet. The other part is that there may be a certain amount of gamesmanship going on with Max in that he's putting everybody on notice that you go wheel to wheel with me and I'm going to get the elbows out really, really fast and I'm going to be pushing on you. which certain people he could try that on, and they may take him out on purpose just to send him a message and say, I'm not taking your message, right? But somebody else who's, you got to think about this. Lando's only had really less than a full season driving a car that has a consistent opportunity to win. Max has been driving a car that has a consistent opportunity to win for years. And so there's a totally different mindset there. Max versus Lando, and that's no dig at Lando. It's just that he hasn't had the equipment that Max has had until really just, like I said, less than a year. And so he's still learning about fighting at the front versus, oh gosh, we finished third today. What an amazing result. That's where they were before.
And to take that principle and apply it to others on the field that are currently there or even have been there, if he were to deploy some of the very tactics that people are criticizing him for against, say, Fernando or Valtteri or Lewis, people who have been in cars
Right.
that have been able to win, what I'm hearing you say is their mentality would be very different and developed to be able to handle the pressure of having someone with their elbows out at the level that he's doing it. Is that the conclusion, like the conclusion you're
Yeah.
trying to help me
Yeah.
come to? Okay.
I mean, I
Yeah.
saw this happen at club racing with, of all people, Malcolm Finch's dad.
Mm.
This was years and years and years ago, and we had entered a new class with new kind of car and all that kind of stuff. And the guy who won the championship the year before was known as an aggressive driver who would, had no problem getting elbows out. Malcolm's dad, Michael, he knew that. First race of the season, this other competitor tried to put an elbows out kind of aggressive move. Michael, Malcolm's dad, literally turned the steering wheel straight into him and took them both out of the race to send a message to this guy. And I mean, he literally walked over and said, you keep doing this kind of stuff and you're going to have a really big crash damage bill this year because I will take you out. I could see Fernando saying the same thing to Max.
Well, even if we think about it, he kind of did that with Liam when Liam was it in COTA?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I felt like it was kind of, when you have the old dog and the little puppies, and the puppies come in and drive the older dog bananas, and the old dog
Yeah.
kind of nips at them and
Swats
goes,
them. Yeah.
yeah, and says, And
Yeah.
when we watched that little interlude between the two of them, I thought, well, good job, Fernando. It's not telling Liam you can't do your hardest, and achieve what you need to, but there is a way in which you need to conduct yourself.
Yeah.
And it does take a seasoning. So I like that perspective that you're saying. As you noted, you don't know that you're right, but I think it's a very valid point because people seem to imply that Lando, because he's open about his mental health, because he seems to be very hard on himself, that like somehow he's not a champion material.
Right.
But what I hear you say is that he's actually a champion still developing the skills, the internal fortitude to be there. And he's not been in a position to have been able to develop it. And that's not the road that Max was given. Like Max was placed into a situation where the car has been good for him. And we've watched that
Right.
maturation happen. I feel like it's a little bit more fair actually than what I feel like the very binary way people are trying to approach Max versus Lando. So
Yeah.
I think it's well worth your opinion being considered.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about Lando and all that, and I know we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but it's germane to the conversation. You got to remember when Lando was 11 years old, he was world champion karting. To have the fortitude as an 11-year-old to undergo that kind of pressure, and yeah, I know it's not Formula One, blah blah blah. Still, don't tell me that this is not a tough guy. And when he was 14, I mean, he was really, really quick in British F4 and won the championship, the first half of the season. I mean, he just almost ran the table. So, I mean, come on. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
buy that he's not mentally tough. I don't buy it for
Yeah.
a second.
I don't either. It doesn't ring true to me. Okay.
Mm-mm.
Well, so then going into a different driver and also thinking about his mental health and kind of where he may be, and someone who has been on the grid, who has been given given a car that has the capacity to win is unfortunately Checo.
Hmm.
And how do you think he's faring? I mean, I've heard so many commentaries and forecasts about his future. Everyone said he's going to leave at Mexico. What are
Hmm.
your thoughts about all of this? I mean, if you were advising Checo right now, what would you be saying to him, and what would you be taking away from his performances so far?
That's such a great question. I don't know that there's much more that could be done to advise him. I mean, I think he's just so on edge, and he's not been able to relax and drive like he can drive, right? I mean, you think about it. This is a guy that basically helped Max win his first world championship, right? And he's stepped up and he's won races and pole positions when maybe Max had an off day. I mean, he's demonstrated that in past years, and yet I think beginning at Miami in 2023, there's something has happened, and it may be just the beatdown of having to be Max Verstappen's teammate, driving a car that you're just not comfortable in. And so he's just not able to get out of this mental funk that he's in. Because I'll be honest with you, I don't think the man's forgotten how to drive. I really don't. I just think that it's just been a really tough road for him to go down for a number of reasons, and it's just got to be incredibly demoralizing. And then it's got to have in the back of his mind that Helmut Marko is ruthless and Christian Horner's not too far behind. And so he's probably looking for footsteps behind him all the time. That's my take.
I'm just surprised with the level of scrutiny, pressure that he continues to get into that car. It just seems like and one part of me wants to tell him, like, Checo, you've done a lot, and maybe it's time to gracefully exit stage right and with
Mm-hmm.
your head held high, and versus I don't want to see you run out or made to feel less than what you are. I would like you to do it gracefully, especially because we have someone like Liam who is performing, at least in these last races that he's been in, very well and is not hiding the fact that he's wanting that. I just don't want to see potentially at the end of Checo's career, for him to walk away a broken person. That's where
Right.
I guess I come from in that
Right.
perspective. So it's talking about Liam. It's clear that he's doing his darndest, to
Yeah.
make sure he's noticed. He has no issue, it seems like to me, putting those elbows out and making sure that anyone that comes in his path to achieve his goal knows, I'm here and you better just take notice of it. I just hope that he has the talent to back it all up. Like it 1, 2, 3 races last year. I don't remember how many he did last year, and then a couple this season. It's not the same as doing multiple races and, as you just said, being Max Verstappen's teammate. So I just don't want him to, using the analogy of skiing, I don't want him to get over his skis
Yeah.
and set himself up for something that might not be what he thinks it is. I do think that there's some value to staying inside the VCARB world, really excelling there, and then truly moving up versus trying to push out the person or really making yourself known. I don't know. That could be
Yeah.
that's
Who
the
knows?
non-racer saying that. I don't
Yep.
understand. You might have a very different opinion on that.
Well, I think one of the things that's pretty interesting is that, he's driven now. He was brought in at Zandvoort. Seems like he did another race in Europe. So he probably had driven on those tracks, in the junior formula. So he's at least had that familiarity, but he went well. And then he went to Singapore and he went really well. And then Danny Ricciardo came back. And then, that was the end of it for 2023 and for the bulk of 2024. But then he comes back in, goes to COTA. He'd never driven there and did well. Mexico, never driven there. He did well. Goes to Brazil, horrible conditions on a track he'd never seen before. And all things considered, he did pretty well. Compared to all the other rookies, he did really well. So Lawson's the real deal, I think.
Mm,
But that said, there's Lawson, there's Behrman, and then there's Colapinto. And those three guys, I mean, I don't know, flip a coin,
right,
and
right.
they're all incredibly talented. I mean, it's exciting to see these guys coming in, and sooner or later, somebody's going to show up and do to Verstappen what Max did to Ricardo.
Yeah, that is true.
Yep.
That is very true. And he will need to be mindful of that. So then we talked about Yuki. I talked about him in my race
Yep.
notes. I just don't think he's being taken seriously. It is
Yep.
frustrating, but it is partially, I think, a tale for anybody, both professionally as well as in the racing world, is that you don't have a second opportunity to make a first
Right.
impression.
Right.
And so all the more to be mindful about how you're conducting yourself throughout the
Hmm.
process to hopefully set yourself up for success. So then
Yep.
looking at Leclerc and Sainz, I think they're doing great. There wasn't much fanfare, as I said, to their successes that they had. I'm hopeful that somehow they can snatch that constructors together, and send off Carlos, who has increasing in my respect for him,
Yep.
and do a great job of preparing Charles for Lewis's presence in the Ferrari team. I don't know
Yep.
about you. What do you think about those
No,
two?
I totally agree. I mean, I think, as we discussed earlier, just in this podcast, I think Ferrari is going to be kind of a race by race deal. When they have a car that suits the track that they're on, I think they're going to be pretty tough to beat. And it really is going to come down when they don't have the best car for that particular track. I think it's going to come down to, I'm going to call it damage control. Can we squeak out a fourth and a fifth instead of a sixth and a seventh? One of
Mm-hmm.
those kind of deals. Should be interesting.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about Lando. I want to
Hmm.
first talk about Oscar and then come back and close up the loop on
Yep.
Lando. Oscar, I think talking about that instinct, I said this when he entered as a rookie. I think he's a slow burn, but he has that fire that we really want to see in a rookie. I think he's biding his time, and I'm kind of excited to see when he and the team decide to unleash it. I think they wisely are restraining it because they do have Lando closer in the ability. Even now, it's still not as plausible, but at least have Lando in that position to be able to take that drivers championship. And they need the both of them ultimately motivated to get them the constructors. I think what'll be interesting is these next three races to see how he responds, how they respond, because it'll give us a prelude for what next season will look like, where I think that's when he's going to want to be unleashed and not
That's
be
right.
seen as an official number two in a team of only number ones.
Yep.
What do you think?
No, I agree. I think he's doing an admirable job of saying, you know what, I'm going to do whatever I can to help Lando win the world championship, even if it's to my detriment, because he's playing the long game. And I think, he's got Mark Webber as his driver manager, and let's face it, Weber is fully aware of the politics of Formula One and how it works and all that. And I think he's making sure that Oscar is listening to him. And I think Oscar has demonstrated enough that everyone knows that this guy is going to be something to contend with in the future. And I think really next year, I think until, it's pretty late in the season, if either Lando or Oscar are contending for the world championship, the other driver is going to be asked to go and back up that other driver. And if it's Oscar who's contending next year, I would expect Lando to step up and do it. Because, all it would take is for somebody to take you out of a race or two early in the season. Your championship is going to become really difficult. Not
Mm-hmm.
impossible, but difficult.
Okay, so then anything else you want to add to the Lando conversation?
Yeah, I just want to say that Lando is fully capable of running the tables the last three races and taking it all. And if I was going to advise Lando, I would say, look, dude, relax, go have fun, drive your best. Don't worry about what Max is doing. Just go out and win. If Max still winds up winning the world championship, okay, but you've had a hell of a season. You had a slow start when nobody thought they could beat Red Bull, and then all of a sudden you guys were on par, and then beyond it, it's going to be a different scenario next year. It's going to be at least a level playing field starting off, and it will probably stay that way for the whole season. So use this time where you have the best car, make hay while you can.
I like that. So let's move on to Hamilton and Russell. I would
Mm,
say George is trying. You can hear it, you can see it.
yep.
And I think he has to be at his wits' end right now. And then with Hamilton, as much as he may not want to admit it, I think he's checked out. It's a situation where sometimes you've probably seen this in your employment situations. Someone gives in their notice, but they still stay like more than the 2 weeks to wrap up their stuff. They stay a little bit longer. And then
Yep.
they just kind of risk that phoning in kind of thing. I
Hmm.
don't think he's truly phoning it in, but I also think his mind is not there. I think the things that are maybe hard for him or he never maybe really liked or was frustrating now are amplified because he knows
Right.
it's not going to get resolved. And
Right.
so that frustration, I think, is probably coming out a little bit. You felt like you felt that definitely during the Brazil race. What about you?
Yeah, I think when Lewis won at Silverstone earlier this year, I think it was sort of like his going away present to Mercedes. And I think given how much he doesn't like the car and how on edge that car always is, and they can't seem to get it fixed, I think I don't want to say he's checked out, but let's just say he's lost interest. And I think that if the car was better, I think Lewis would not have lost interest. That's my take.
That's a good point. I think that's a very valid point. Okay, so then somebody who consistently comes in and just puts it in there that I got to say, I know you've always been a fan of his. I've been a fan, but this last month, two things occurred that made my respect for him increase to such a level was Fernando Alonso. I
Hmm.
mean, he truly is a class act. I know this is not a surprise to you,
Right.
but when I listened to his interview, I think it was on the Beyond the Grid, the official F1 podcast, and I listened to him talk, and it just was like, wow, you inspire me not just because you're a racer, but even just the way that you're carrying yourself professionally as a human being and the team leader aspect of it, all of that. I was so in awe, and to the point that I think I even sent it to you. I was like, of course you're gonna love this, Dick.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
then the Brazilian Grand Prix, for him to be recovering from illness, to complete the Grand Prix, and as you noted earlier, complaining about porpoising and saying on the radio, I'm going to finish this race for the mechanics. And then to see the video of him struggling to get out, and I'm not going to tell people how old I am, but let's just say I'm around Fernando's age. So I understand like that you're not 20, but you're also not old, but you're starting to feel your body in a very different way. And for
Hmm.
him to consistently go in there and do that is kind of amazing to me.
Yep.
And then for him to pull what he did of getting into the car and doing it and coming out, wow, I just had no words. Like I was in awe of him.
Yeah, no, I mean, pretty amazing. He raced at Indianapolis twice, and first time out he almost won it, and then his engine blew. And the second time he was with McLaren, and they had all sorts of troubles, and the car didn't qualify. But the reason it didn't qualify was that he crashed his primary car in practice, and so all the trick stuff didn't make it. And the point of the story was I have this amazing picture of him standing outside of the garage late at night. The inside of the garage is buzzing with mechanics and bright lights as they're working on his car to get it fixed so that he can drive it in practice the next day. And he's just standing there with his hands clasped behind his back, just letting his guys know that, hey, I'm there.
Mm-hmm.
There
Mm-hmm.
was nothing he could do other than to say, I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
And that picture says it all
Yeah.
about him. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we have an upcoming interview that will be airing hopefully soon, where the person that we interviewed highlighted for some of the things that a young or a driver who is developing themselves needs to consider. And I think that that was one of the things that he had highlighted is being there with your team. That's
Yep.
what's going to make you stand out. And so for Fernando to do that, it just shows what a class act he is and where he
Yep.
has learned those principles and why people want to believe in him and want to work with him.
Right.
So then going on to the other side of the spectrum of veteran status, it would be, we've talked about him a little bit, Colapinto. Like I would say, wow, he has come in and really shaken up things. He's now on everybody's radar. I'm wondering if over these next three races, he could really hold under the pressure. I
Mhm.
I wondered, with Brazil, it was a wet race, and as we said, the wet is the equalizer in so many ways. And I'm just kind of wondering if maybe people are thinking, hey, let's kick these tires a little bit. Let's not get so excited. Let's be cautious. I'm not saying he's not worthy of a seat, so don't mishear me on that. I just felt like the race kind of showed his rookiness a little bit, as
Oh
well as
yeah.
even with Ollie. and that's where I'm grateful that you highlighted how Liam did excel and
Hmm.
does potentially have that talent that, if given the opportunity, can really unfold and highlight to so many people how good he is. Regardless of how Franco is performing, what I do think is happening is Alex is being pushed. I hope that he's going to take the time over these next few weeks to rest and remind himself of all the mental health work he must have done in the post Red
Hmm.
Bull world, and
Right.
that he is in a leadership role. Carlos is coming in, and Carlos doesn't have a history of being that cutthroat person, but being a really good collaborator as a rival.
Yep.
So hopefully Alex does not do anything, because I wanted to ask this earlier. I know that they have announced him, but we know that contracts can always be changed. If
Yep.
Franco really were to perform excellently, do you think that there is a possibility that they would sub out Franco for Alex?
Well, I think they will do everything they can to find a ride for Franco in 2025. If you listen to the rumor mill, he's either going to Red Bull or he's going to RB. I don't think they would send Albon back to Red Bull, for example, because I don't think James Vowles rolls that way. If it was Red Bull and that the shoe was on their foot, yeah, I'd see him doing it, quite frankly. But I don't see it happen with Williams. Of course, I've been wrong, and contracts are made to be broken and all those fun things.
Well, we'll have to wait and see. Hopefully, I'm wrong, and I don't want that to happen to Alex.
If I had to guess, and I was, this is all conjecture on my part, and my crystal ball is hazy at the best of times, but I would say that probably what's going to happen is Sergio's going to get shown the door. Lawson's going to be put into the Red Bull next to Max, and Colapinto will go to RB. I don't know what happens to poor old Yuki. He's just going to have to be okay with driving for RB.
I think that is a good forecast. We'll have to see if that happens, because
Yep.
I think it will. Okay, so then let's just quickly go through the last three pairs. Valtteri and Joe. Again, I reserve my thoughts on them because I don't know
Hmm.
how they're getting into the race car every weekend and going through the laps and coming out motivated to go do it again the next weekend. That
Yep.
I wouldn't want to be able. I wouldn't want to do that.
No.
Pierre and Esteban, we talked about this a little bit. I am so grateful to see what you also saw, which is a warming, a maturity between the two of them that can say, look, past is past, future is future. Here we are right now, and let's do what we have to do and then go our separate ways. Like a healthy reconciliation that allows you to both be who you are. We don't know what caused the hardship between the two of them, but I'm really glad that that warmness is there, especially after Monaco this year. Like I would
Oh
never
yeah.
have thought that that could ever happen. So those
Yep.
smiles and hugs really seemed real this weekend, and I hope that they can part ways and continue on their respective F1 careers
Yep.
in good terms. Nico and Kevin, both. I'm really impressed by them. I'm glad that they're in there to help this team, and both of them do not look like they're going to be connected to the team in the future. They have their own respective drives, or no drive for Kevin so far. But I mean, this is the way to be mature racing drivers, in my opinion, of
Hmm.
like showing that you can just go in and do the work. And I think maybe it's also their age gives them the ability to put this in the position that it healthy wise that it needs to be. So your
Yep.
thoughts?
Yeah, no, and I agree. I think, the little bit that I'm seeing is that it's possible that what's going to happen at Haas is that obviously Nico's moving on. Esteban is replacing Nico. Ollie Beerman is replacing Kevin, but they're saying that Kevin's probably going to have a role in this. So
Oh, really? I hadn't
of
heard
some sort.
that.
Yeah, of some sort. So anyway, nothing, nothing concrete or anything like that, but it sounds like that he's still going to be involved. So clearly he's a valued member. It's just that I
Nice.
think they're saying that, hey, with Ollie, we need this kid in the car. So
That's good. If that's the
yep.
case, that makes so much sense. And I think it's, again, another strategic decision that's wise on their part to do, because Kevin has proven that he can do good for the team.
Yep.
Okay, wrapping it all up, because I know time is fleeting and we
Yep.
have to go to our regular world, even though we'd love to talk about Formula One forever. If I were a new fan, I would be telling myself that first off, COTA is awesome
Hmm.
and like everybody needs to go,
Yep.
and it's one that I want to go to. Like really, it's a beautiful track. It's wonderful opportunity to watch the drivers show their skill. All the technical though and regulatory conversations that I feel like started to really hit a fever pitch during that race and then is now not only continue during these other races, like adjusting the racing guidelines, permanent stewards, cursing, track limits, fair, clean racing, track surfaces. They're all good conversations to have, and I would say probably necessary, but not to let the commentators or even these social media creators take away the focus away from excellent racing and what is also turning out to be fantastic car development. What about you?
Yeah, I agreed with that. I would also say the on-track war between Max and Lando has been good. I've really enjoyed it. I've even when they're not in proximity to each other, it's been fun to watch. They're trying so hard to beat the other guy. So that's really great. And I've said it already, so a little bit of a broken record. That win by Max at Interlagos, that's going to go down as one of the epic drives in Formula One, and just kind of savor watching a guy who's really, really good at his craft go out and be really, really good at his craft.
Agreed. We have 2 weeks and then 3 races and then a little bit of a tear that it means the end of the 2024 season. But I think it's necessary for everyone to have a break. And we have so much content that we have planned to release. So hopefully we'll be able to feed people's F1 hunger in those few weeks between the 24 and 25 season. So I look forward, Dick, to our final conversation of the season as it officially happens for a monthly review.
That sounds great. Looking forward to it. Looking forward to the races too.
Okay, friends, what did you think of our conversation? Drop me a line via email, sabrina@2guysaGirlandF1.com. Can you help us out? If you haven't already, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app, as well as share this episode with other F1 fans. We know our growth is because of you, and the guys and I thank you. And with that, let me say, we'll keep talking and you can keep listening in, because we're just 2 guys, a girl, and F1. For John, Dick, and me, Sabrina, thanks for listening.